The morning my wife died, the rain came down so hard it sounded like the roof was going to cave in. I was standing in our kitchen in Ballarat, holding a cup of tea that had gone cold an hour earlier, when the constable knocked on my door. Beverly had been driving back from what she called one of her quarterly retreats up near Daylesford. A petrol tanker had jackknifed on a wet bend of the Western Highway, and her little blue Corolla had been the first car behind it. They told me she would not have suffered. I'm not sure I believed them, but I nodded anyway, because that's what you do when a young copper in a soaked uniform is standing in your doorway, trying to do the worst part of his job. My name is Russell Ashbridge. I'm 67 years old, a retired civil engineer, and for 41 years I had been married to a woman I thought I knew better than I knew myself. Bev was 63 when she died. We had built a quiet, comfortable life in a weatherboard house with a deep veranda and a magnolia tree that she had planted the week we moved in. We had a son, Callum, who lived in Brisbane with his own family, and we had a routine that had carried us gently from our 40s into our 60s without much fuss. I thought we'd be one of those couples who go on cruises in their 70s and complain about the buffet. I never thought I'd be standing in a solicitor's office on Sturt Street 8 days after her funeral, holding a set of keys to a place I had never heard of. The solicitor was a woman called Margaret Tyndall, about 50, with a careful manner and reading glasses on a chain. She slid a manila folder across the desk towards me, and on top of the folder she placed a small leather keyring with 2 keys and a brass tag that read 14B. "Mr. Ashbridge," she said, "your wife held a property in her sole name, a 2-bedroom apartment in South Yarra. The deed is now yours. There's also a separate account that has been kept current for 38 years, with standing instructions that passed to you on her death." I sat there blinking at her for a long moment. South Yarra is in Melbourne, more than an hour's drive from Ballarat. Bev and I had been to Melbourne perhaps a dozen times in our entire marriage, mostly for medical appointments or to see a show. "There must be a mistake," I said. "There's no mistake, Mr. Ashbridge. Your wife was very particular about her instructions. She also left this." Margaret Tyndall reached into her drawer and brought out a sealed white envelope with my name written across the front in Bev's familiar slanted handwriting. The sight of those letters, the loops she always made on the R and the double L, hit me harder than the keys had. "She asked that I give it to you when you were ready to visit the apartment. Not before." I drove home in a fog. The keys sat on the passenger seat, where Bev's handbag used to sit. The envelope was in my coat pocket, against my chest, and I could feel it there like a small hot stone the whole way. That night I sat in our living room with the television off and a glass of whiskey I didn't drink. I kept thinking about all the things she had asked me, gently but firmly over the years, never to question. The retreats 4 times a year. The phone calls she would take in the garden, walking slow circles around the magnolia with her back to the house. The 2 days she always spent in Melbourne after each retreat. Decompressing, she called it. In a hotel I had never been told the name of. I had never pushed. Bev had said early in our marriage, when she first started going, that there were parts of her past she needed her own space to manage. And she had asked me, with tears in her eyes, to trust her on that one thing. And I had. For nearly 4 decades I had. I had told myself it was a mark of how strong our marriage was, that I could give her that space. Sitting on the lounge that night, the keys in my hand, I started to wonder if I had been a fool. I drove down to South Yarra 3 days later. The apartment was on the 2nd floor of a quiet brick building set back from Toorak Road, the kind of place with a small front garden and a lemon tree by the gate. I climbed the stairs slowly. My knee, the one I had wrecked at 50 playing cricket with Callum, ached on every step. At the door of 14B I stopped, and I stood there for what must have been 5 minutes before I could make my hand turn the key. I had told myself I was prepared for anything. I was prepared to find another man's clothes in the wardrobe. I was prepared to find photographs, hotel receipts, a second life laid out in glossy pieces. I was prepared. I thought. For the worst. I was not prepared for the woman sitting in the lounge room. She stood up the moment I opened the door. She was perhaps in her late 30s. Tall, with auburn hair tied back, and the same particular way of holding her shoulders that I had watched my wife hold hers across 1,000 kitchen tables. She had Bev's eyes. She had Bev's mouth. She was a stranger, and she was also unmistakably familiar, and for a long moment I could not breathe. "You must be Russell," she said, and her voice was not Bev's voice at all, but the way she said my name, careful, almost apologetic. That was Bev exactly. I stood in the doorway with the keys still in my hand. I think I tried to speak, and nothing came out. "My name is Eleanor," she said. "Eleanor Hartley. Mum told me you would come. She said you'd come when you were ready, and not before, and I should be patient." She gave a small, broken laugh. "I've been waiting in this flat once a fortnight for the last 3 weeks, just in case." I closed the door behind me. I had to lean against it. The hallway smelled faintly of jasmine. The same jasmine perfume Bev had worn since she was 20. "I'm sorry," I said. My voice came out rough. "I'm sorry, but I don't understand." "Mum?" Eleanor's eyes filled, and she pressed her hand against her mouth for a moment, and I watched my wife's gesture happen on a stranger's face. "I think you'd better sit down," she said. I sat down on a little blue sofa I had never seen before, in a room that contained pieces of my wife, scattered through it like a code I was only just learning to read. There was a watercolor of the Daylesford Lakes hanging above the mantelpiece, painted in Bev's hand. There was a vase of dried lavender, the same kind she grew along our back fence. There was a bookshelf full of the historical novels she pretended she read for the plots, when really she read them for the descriptions of old houses. Eleanor went into the kitchen and came back with 2 glasses of water. She put one in my hand and folded herself onto the armchair opposite me, and for a long moment we just looked at each other, because neither of us knew where to start. "How old are you?" I asked, because it was the only question my brain could form. "I'm 38, she said. "I was born in March 1988. I did the arithmetic in my head, slowly, because nothing in my head was working at full speed. Bev and I had married in October 1984. Eleanor would have been conceived sometime in the middle of 1987. 3 years into our marriage. While we were still living in that small unit in Ballarat East, while I was still doing my graduate rotations and Bev was working at the library. "I don't understand," I said again. The words felt useless in my mouth. "Mum left me a letter to give to you," Eleanor said. "She left one for you with the solicitor, and she left this one with me. She said you might want to read mine first, because the other one is harder." She got up and went to a small writing desk by the window, and she came back with a cream envelope addressed simply to Russ. Bev was the only person in my life who had ever called me Russ. To everyone else, I had always been Russell, even my mother. I opened the envelope with hands that had begun, embarrassingly, to shake. The letter was 4 pages long. Bev's handwriting got smaller and tighter as it went on, the way it always did when she was upset. She wrote that the woman sitting across from me was her daughter. Not our daughter. Hers. She wrote that Eleanor had been born in March of 1988, in a private hospital in Melbourne, and that she had been given up for adoption 3 days later to a couple from Geelong. She wrote that I had not been the father. I had to put the letter down for a moment. My chest hurt in a way I hadn't felt since my own father died. When I picked it up again, I made myself read on. Bev wrote that in 1987, in our 3rd year of marriage, she had begun what she called a slow drift. She was 24. I was 25 and working 60-hour weeks on a country roads project that kept me out of Ballarat from Monday to Friday. She had been lonely in a way she had not known how to tell me about, and a man named Douglas Pennefather had come into the library where she worked, and he had been kind to her, and she had been weak, and she had been pregnant before she fully understood what she had done. She wrote that she had told Douglas, and he had given her $300 and told her to take care of it, and that she had not seen him again. She wrote that for 2 months she had not told me, because she had been trying to find the courage to take her own life. She had stood, she said, on the bridge over the Yarra one evening in winter, and she had decided not to jump. And she had decided then that she would not destroy our marriage either, because she did not believe she deserved the kindness that would have required from me. She had told her mother instead. Bev's mother, Edith, whom I had loved like my own and who had died in 1995, had taken her down to Melbourne, had arranged the private hospital, had arranged the adoption through a Catholic agency, had arranged the 4 months Bev was supposedly away helping a sick aunt in Adelaide. I remembered that period. I remembered being lonely too. I remembered her coming home thinner and quieter, and I remembered putting it down to her aunt's illness, and I remembered being grateful when the color came back into her cheeks over the following year. She wrote that she had never stopped thinking about Eleanor for a single day, that when Eleanor turned 18 in 2006, the agency had passed on a letter from the daughter asking whether her birth mother might be willing to make contact. Bev had said yes. She had bought the apartment in South Yarra in 2007 with money from her mother's estate, so that she would have somewhere to meet Eleanor that was neither Eleanor's home nor a public place. The retreats in Daylesford had been real, sometimes. The 2 days afterwards in Melbourne had been Eleanor. The last page of the letter was the one that broke me. She wrote that she had been a coward for 41 years. She wrote that she had told herself she was protecting our marriage and our son and our quiet life, and that she had also been protecting her own shame, and that there was no clean way to separate the two. She wrote that she had loved me every day of those 41 years, and that the loving and the lying had lived inside her, like two animals in the same small cage, and she had not known how to set either of them free. She wrote, in the last line, "For my Russ, who deserved better, I'm sorry, truly, completely. And for as long as you'll carry this, I'm sorry." I sat on the little blue sofa with the letter in my lap, and I cried, in a way I hadn't cried since I was 7 years old, and my dog had been hit by a milk truck. Eleanor, my wife's daughter, sat across from me in silence, with her own tears running down her face, and she did not try to comfort me, because she understood, I think, that there was no comfort to be given yet. She just sat. She just waited. That was a kindness I have not forgotten. After a long time, I asked her to tell me about herself. I needed to hear a different voice in my head. She told me that she had been raised in Geelong by a couple called Peter and Helen Hartley. Peter had been a primary school teacher, Helen a nurse. They had given her a good childhood. They had told her when she was 7 that she was adopted, and they had been honest with her about every question she ever asked. Peter had died of bowel cancer when Eleanor was 22. Helen was still alive, living in a retirement village in Torquay, and Eleanor saw her every Sunday. Eleanor was a midwife. She had 2 children of her own, a boy of 9 and a girl of 6. Her husband, Adam, was a high school maths teacher. My mom, Helen, she said, choosing the word carefully, was the one who encouraged me to write to the agency when I turned 18. She said I had 2 mothers, and I deserved to know them both. She's been the most generous person about all of this. I don't know that I'd have had the strength to do it without her. I asked her what Bev had been like, in this place, in these stolen weekends. Eleanor smiled, and the smile was so much my wife's that I had to look down at my hands. She was nervous, mostly, Eleanor said, especially in the early years. She used to apologize for everything. The weather, the traffic, the color of the curtains in here. It took her about 5 years to stop apologizing every time I walked in the door. She paused. She talked about you constantly. I want you to know that. She wasn't here pretending to be someone else. She was here being herself. And herself was a woman who was married to Russell Ashbridge and who loved him very much, and who couldn't stop talking about his rose garden and his terrible jokes and the way he made tea. I asked her, after a while, whether she had ever met Douglas Pennefather, the man whose $300 had been the price of her existence. She shook her head. Mum told me his name when I asked, but she said she had never made contact again, and she didn't know where he was. I tracked him down myself, 3 years ago. He died in 2011. He was a real estate agent in Adelaide. He had 2 other children. I never wrote to him. I didn't want to. I nodded slowly. There was nothing to say to that. We sat in the apartment until it got dark. We didn't turn the lights on. After a while, Eleanor made us a sandwich each, with bread she had brought that morning in case I came, and we ate them on the sofa, and she told me about her son, who was obsessed with cricket statistics, and her daughter, who had decided at 6 that she was going to be a vet and a ballerina at the same time. When I got up to leave, my knees almost gave way under me. Eleanor caught my elbow. "I don't expect anything from you," she said. "I want you to know that. I have a family. I have a mum. I'm not here to take a place that isn't mine. Mum wanted us to meet. And I wanted to meet the man she was so terrified of disappointing. Because I wanted to know what kind of man inspires that much love and that much fear in the same heart." I stood in the doorway with one hand on the frame and one hand on the keys. "I don't know what to do with any of this," I said. "I don't even know what I'm allowed to feel." "You're allowed to feel anything, Russell," she said. Mum always said that. She said feelings aren't crimes. I drove back to Ballarat that night, through fog so thick I had to crawl the last 20 kilometers at 60. When I got home, the magnolia tree was lit up by the porch light, and I sat in the car, in my own driveway, and cried for the second time that day. For the next 2 weeks, I did almost nothing. I told Callum a version of the truth on the phone, just enough so that he wouldn't think his father was losing his mind, and he flew down from Brisbane the following weekend. We sat on the back veranda, and I told him everything, and he listened without interrupting, the way I had once listened to him at 14 when he had something hard to say. When I was finished, my son got up and walked around the garden for 10 minutes by himself, and when he came back, he sat down next to me and took my hand, which he had not done since he was a small child. And he said, "Dad, what do you want to do?" I said I didn't know. He said, "Take your time. There's no rush on this. But for what it's worth, I'd like to meet her one day. If she'd have me." I went back to the apartment on a Wednesday in early spring. Eleanor was there. We had agreed on the day by text. The jasmine on the balcony had started to flower. We sat on the same sofa as before, and we talked for 4 hours. She brought photographs of her children. The boy looked, around the eyes, exactly like Bev's father had looked in the one photograph I had ever seen of him as a young man. We met every fortnight after that. Sometimes in the apartment, sometimes at a cafe on Chapel Street, once at a small park near her home where her children played on a climbing frame. And I watched and tried to learn how to be in their world without pushing my way into it. They called me Mr. Ashbridge for the first 3 visits, and then one Saturday the little girl, whose name was Poppy, climbed onto my lap and asked if she could call me Pop because her friend at school had a pop and she wanted one. Eleanor looked at me across the picnic blanket. I said yes. I was crying again, I think, but quietly enough that Poppy didn't notice. 6 months after I had first opened the door of that apartment, Eleanor and I were sitting on the balcony with a pot of tea between us. And she said, "I want to ask you something, and I want you to take all the time you need to answer." He told her to ask. "I have a mum," she said. "I have a dad I lost. I had a birth mother I loved very much. What I don't have is a man in my life who knew her the way you knew her. My children are growing up without any connection to that side of where they come from, and I don't want them to grow up like that. I don't want to make you anything. I don't want to give you a title that doesn't sit right, but I would like, if you're willing, for us to be a kind of family. In whatever shape that takes. I'd like Poppy to keep calling you Pop. I'd like Henry to keep showing you his cricket cards. I'd like you to come to Christmas, if you want to. And if you don't want any of that, I will understand. And we can keep meeting at this apartment for as long as you'll have me. I sat there looking out over the rooftops of South Yarra, with my hands wrapped around my teacup, and I thought about my wife. I thought about the 41 years of mornings she had made me toast, and the 41 years of evenings she had sat across from me at our kitchen table, and the bridge over the Yarrowie in winter, where she had decided not to jump. I thought about how badly she had hurt me and how badly she had hurt herself, and I thought about whether one of those things outweighed the other. And I decided, after a long quiet moment, that it didn't matter whether it did. I'd like that, I said. I'd like all of that. Eleanor reached across the little wrought iron table and took my hand, and we sat like that for a long time, neither of us saying anything, while the late sun went down over the apartment buildings of Toorak Road. I sold the apartment the following year, with Eleanor's blessing. The money I split 3 ways. A third went to her children, in trust, for their education. A third went to Callum's children, for the same. The last third I put towards a small foundation, set up through Margaret Tyndall's office, that helps young women in regional Victoria who have unplanned pregnancies and nowhere safe to go. I named it after my wife, Beverly Joyce Ashbridge, the woman who for 41 years had carried a secret that had nearly killed her once, and that, in the end, had not killed our marriage, even when she was no longer alive to defend it. Last Christmas, Henry and Poppy came up to Ballarat with their parents, and Callum flew down with his wife and their 2 girls, and we all sat around the table on my back veranda under the magnolia Bev had planted 42 years ago, and we ate prawns and pavlova and pulled crackers. And Henry asked me if I would teach him how to bowl a proper outswinger over the summer holidays. I said I would. After lunch, Eleanor and I walked down to the bottom of the garden together, and she stopped under the magnolia, and she said, "She would have loved this, you know." I said, "I know. I want to say something to whoever is still listening to an old man tell a long story. I don't know what kind of marriage you have. I don't know what kind of secrets are sitting in the drawers and hard drives and quiet corners of your house. I am not here to tell you that the answer is always to forgive, because some things cannot be forgiven, and I will never tell another person where their line is. I am here to tell you only this. The day my wife died, I thought my life with her was finished. The day I opened the door of that apartment, I thought my life with her had been a lie. Both of those things turned out to be wrong. The truth was harder and stranger than either of them. The truth was that she had loved me, and she had failed me, and she had hurt herself worse than she had hurt me. And she had also, in the end, given me the chance to become someone larger than the man I had been at 66. She gave me a granddaughter who calls me Pop. She gave me a grandson who wants me to teach him cricket. She gave me a stranger who turned out to be a daughter of a kind, even if not a daughter of my blood. I have learned, in the 1.5 years since she died, that the people we love are larger than the version of them we are allowed to see. That keeping a secret for 40 years does not undo the love that ran alongside it. That the dead leave us tasks we did not ask for, and that those tasks, if we are brave enough to take them up, can be the last and best gifts they give us. I have learned that forgiveness is not a single decision you make at a kitchen table. It is 1,000 small decisions you make every morning when you choose to keep walking towards the people who are still in front of you, instead of walking back towards the wound that is behind you. If you are young and you are carrying something heavy, please tell someone. Please do not stand on a bridge in winter the way my wife once did. There is almost always a third path between the two terrible ones you can see. If you are old, and someone you love has left you with more questions than answers, take your time. Open the door slowly. Let the people on the other side of it surprise you. Sometimes what looks like the end of a life turns out to be the beginning of a much wider one. My name is Russell Ashbridge. My wife's name was Beverly. She made mistakes, and so have I, and so will you, and so will the people you love most. The magnolia is still in the back garden. Poppy planted a rosemary bush next to it last winter. The light through both of them, on a clear morning, is as good a reason as I know to keep getting out of bed. Thank you for listening.